Hey, what's up everybody? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be doing some abstract sound design with delay feedback. I want to open this video up about saying how fun this can be, but also how dangerous this can be for your ears. So before we go any further, it's very imperative that you're doing this at a very low volume, that you're stacking, limiters and clippers and stuff, and that you're being very mindful of your hearing. You're most likely going to hear some really high resonances throughout this video. I'm going to try to keep the levels relatively manageable, but I can't talk about this more without first saying that. So if that seems interesting though, and you live and thrive in the name of danger, then let's go ahead and dive in and figure out how to do some feedback delay stuff within Bitwig. You can also do this with other things as well, but it's just easiest to do this with what I'm going to be showing you. So there's two main tricks that you can utilize. The first one is actually by sending this, or muting this rather, and then sending this into a return track. And what you can do is create another effect track, kind of like so, and send this into itself. So if I were to go like this, you can also self send, I believe. But if we start to send this into itself kind of like so, I'm going to turn this down immediately, then it's probably not going to be all that different, but just take a listen. Yeah, we're already getting stuff. And so doing things this way can be really fun because what you can do is create a complex delay feedback chain of things that will constantly feedback into itself. So let me show you a very quick example of how this might work out in the means of resampling and whatnot. But what I'm going to do is through each stage of this, I'm most likely going to add a clipper to this and then turn this off for now and this off for now. And what we're going to do is turn this off and keep that there. Let's add an over to this. We're going to add delays to both of these. So the first thing that I want to do is grab a couple of randoms here, because what we really want to try to make with this is not something that's just going to be a tone like that, because at a certain point, if the feedback is just barraging itself, it's going to just sound like one specific tone in general. So if we can find ways to break it up, then that will give us a lot of access to creating cool different variations. So what I've done is I'm just going to set this to maybe a bar, to where this is going to turn on and off every bar or so and make different changes. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set the time here to kind of jump back and forth, and then we'll set this at maybe half of a bar. And if we copy this and set this on this one as well, then now this is going to be feeding into these guys, and we can start to mess and manipulate with these and just make them do different stuff as we kind of experiment. So it's not going to sound all that interesting at the moment, but let's just take a listen and see what this sounds like for now. Okay. Cool. Get what I mean? So that's why you need to be paying very close attention when you do stuff like this, and work at a volume that is going to be extremely quiet, because this is going to get absolutely crazy. So now that we understand that, though, this is kind of like the basic synopsis of how you can do this. We can actually kind of do the same thing with just a single channel. So maybe in another video, I'll take this further and we'll send this through multiple feedback channels or whatever. But what I'm actually going to do instead is I'm just going to copy this delay here, and I'm going to make sure that these other guys are off and not send this in. And I'm just going to place a delay here onto this, because now that I have two of these that are going to be moving at the same interval-ish, but doing different stuff, we can kind of get a similar vibe off of that without it getting too crazy just yet. One thing that we do want to be careful of, though, is not sending too much feedback into this, because that's like a one-way ticket to not fun. So I'm going to turn this down just a little bit, but let's take a listen now. Cool. So it doesn't seem too bad for now. So let's go ahead and turn that back up. And now let's maybe introduce, something entirely different, like something like Snap Heap. Snap Heap, you can use anything that has modulators. This is just a really fast way. And like, this is my default project to where, or default template to where this already has random stuff mapped to it. But I mean, imagine if we were to just kind of quick fire some stuff here, kind of like so, where we don't really think about this too much, but maybe we do something like that. We do a bandpass filter. And this is kind of the fun of this because I honestly don't have a direction with this and I don't really care. But the fun of it is to get lost with some of these things and try to just enjoy the process about being like, hey, what's going to come out of the other side of this? Most of the time, it's not going to be anything that interesting and you're going to get a lot of garbage. But, if you sit there and you're a little bit patient with it, then sometimes you can get some really cool stuff that will kind of, help you start a track or help you figure out, some layering things or whatever. We can grab a saturator. And again, I'm really trying not to think about this too hard, but something kind of like that. And then maybe some cool kind of like filter table. Very quickly, I'll make a wavetable here and just do that. And I'm hoping that you can't see what's happening right now, but my monitor is actually going haywire and it's driving me crazy, but we'll talk about that another time. Cool. So now that we have this, it doesn't need to be anything crazy, but we can manipulate the wavetable to shape over time. And then we can actually change this to do its morphing and whatnot. Finally, we'll end this off with, I don't know, an OTT or something. Because again, I'm not trying to, this isn't the point of the video. It's just to kind of be like, oh, let's get a rack going or something. And I wanted to show you this from scratch because this is a lot of times how I think about it when I'm just trying to explore. But because we have a rack now, we can kind of use this as a effect toolkit to place in between these in order to get different sounds that's going to come out of the other side. So you're going to have to give it a second, but it'll come. Don't you worry. And basically you can use that to get a lot of cool variations and a lot of other interesting things. I mean, especially if you are somebody that does design for games or for, I don't know, sound effects or anything of the sort, even just, getting some cool lasers. Pew pew, you know what I'm saying? Like, these are things that are kind of just adding to your repertoire of using for later. And for me, they're usually just effects, but sometimes I'll hear something that will jump out at me. The last track that I actually wrote, I did this and I was like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. So all in all, this is kind of the synopsis about how this video works. I'll do a couple more things and a couple more experimentations about how you can continue to kind of build on this. But the key takeaways from this is to create something that has a little bit of feedback of where you're sending a signal back into itself, where it's capturing audio or something, and then changing it to where they're kind of feeding off of each other. But then you want to throw a wrench in there in between to where it's not just the signal path and it's not straight. You want to like break it through filters, because if you create this feedback system of like filters and gates and all that other stuff, then you're going to end up getting things that are a little bit more rhythmic and a little bit more varied, rather than just like drones and all that. There's not a right or wrong to do this, but I guess let's go ahead and jump into doing it this way again. And what I'll do is just take this snap heap here. I'll turn this off. And if you're actually really crazy and psycho, then you can do this here on this track and then send this into these. But yeah, so I'll send this into this at about 50%. And then on this one, I'll place the snap heap. This one will have the delay. And then maybe what I'll do is use beam or something to create some weird variation. One thing that I love about beam is that you can just hit this magic button a billion times and it will come up with a brand new patch for you. I do have factory content that I've made. I have not done this to to make the patches, just as a disclaimer. That looks cool. But let's turn this down again and see what that sounds like after feeding these into themselves. So we'll go delay auto, and then we'll send that back into this by just a little bit. So okay, seems okay so far. Yeah. So while this is working and it's sending itself through these feedback networks, which isn't super complex, you can start to change and manipulate stuff yourself as well. So we can move this over here and change certain aspects of this, or even pull up different racks while we move through these sounds and shape them. You can see that that's starting to get loud. So when you start to hear that getting louder and stuff, turn it down and try to make sure that you're just being mindful about how this works, and move slow. Don't do anything sudden. So this time I'm just going to pull up a different kind of rack, just because I think I've already shown you all how I make these. But now I can turn this on and then just cycle through some of this stuff and see how it pans out. I'm going to kind of just fire off some feedback into itself again to try to keep it alive. But kind of when this starts to, you know, fizzle out or whatever, then just turn the original signal back on. Then turn it off, and then it'll kind of reset itself. And then you can always back up, you know, if this gets too crazy. Yep. This is why you work at low volume. Let's try a different one. And fire the signal back through it again. You can do something interesting like this, where you're firing a transgate through it now to break up the sounds. Let's move that to this one. I have no idea like what's making what do what, but that's okay. yeah. So now we've got a ton of texture and just weird things to mess around with. And even though this stuff is, you know, we made it really quiet, I think that you can always bring it back up. You can always put OTTs over it. But a lot of times, you know, I think that a lot of people would be like, well, what do you do with these sounds? And that's honestly a super fair question. And of course, the answer is that context is king. And, you know, there's always, like, that's always going to be a thing. But if we listen back to some of this stuff and we kind of just use a little bit of it to be like, oh, maybe there's just a piece of this or something that's useful. Or you get into further processing it of where now you send this thing into these, then it just becomes this endless cycle of like destroying sounds. So, yeah, if we kind of just listen to a couple of these moments here. You know, I mean, what if you use something like that as an intro, you know? Actually, you could probably use it as a hook if you really wanted to, but if we leave this at a bar here or something of the sort. You know, and if you have like a beat over that or something like, you know, then if you're creative enough, then you can kind of find some really cool moments like that, but it's kind of going to be up to you to start making sense of it. And my best advice for doing stuff like this is to try to just practice in what I just did here. Like obviously that was a very easy thing. But, you know, let's say you've got some things that maybe have a little bit of rhythm or a little bit of percussion to them. You know, okay, so we've got two different sounds now that we can kind of throw into context with each other. So if I were to even just do something as basic as this, right, we've got a call and response now with two different sounds. You know, something else that is really important to think about with this kind of thing is to be able to push this out and then be like this with repitch. Like that's kind of cool. This reminds me of KK Slider. You know, but you can use this now as like a rhythmic element or to support that under some of this other stuff. So, or, you know, we can turn this up and break this apart again and just use certain moments of it. So let's say we want to kind of place that there and then maybe move this one here. And then we really only need these, but, you know, we can create a different shaker pattern with this. Or hi-hats. You know what I mean? We can scrub through some of this audio. You know, that's kind of cool. So if we did something kind of like this and just created a little riff. Kind of like so. It's like almost musical, you know? There is a note in that, so if we can figure out what note that is, or we could honestly just pick one, you know, just by doing something like this. Right? So, you know, you can pick A sharp 4 or whatever just by picking that resonance out. But what we would do is instead of doing what I just did there, we would make this dynamic and pull this up. And, you know what I'm saying? Just kind of get lost in the sauce of having all of these different sounds and whatever to work with. Now, I will say, like, the number one thing that aside from the safety thing that I think is really important to keep in mind, is that whenever you're trying to make music from these kinds of things, if you can leave yourself to be as open-minded as possible, then you're going to find a lot more success. But if you kind of come at this in a way, and there is maybe a different topic or a point of contention that I could bring up of being able to put intention into the experimentation, I guess. But for the most part, the only thing that you're really looking for is just anything that sounds interesting. And the first thing that comes into your mind, the first thing that you're like, oh, that's kind of cool, that's the thing that you should run with if you're looking to create something that is useful material out of this. But there's nothing wrong with just spending, a couple hours of doing this kind of thing, provided that but now that you kind of have the tools to be able to utilize that, there's a lot of other ways and other DAWs and other stuff to be able to kind of get to this point of what I was just demonstrating. And I used the melody this time. So use a bass, use drums. Drums are great. There is another kind of tool that you can use that would be just as good, if not maybe even better, because it's not as dangerous. That is a buffer tool, like a buffer rescan or a buffer repeat or something. There's a couple of free ones out there on the internet if you kind of just Google it. But what that will do is it'll take a piece of audio and then it will play back almost like in a sampler loop fashion, maybe perhaps a looper, but that will kind of just like regurgitate a lot of stuff for you. It's very similar to granular synthesis, but the cool thing about it is that you don't actually have to record audio and then put it into a synth. It's just going to constantly quickfire. And then anything that you hear, which I would 100% recommend rolling sampler, that you're like, oh, that's interesting or whatever, then just pull that out. Because, like, let's face it, most of this stuff I don't find particularly interesting, right? I don't know, maybe if you're trying to give someone tinnitus or something, but not me personally. Like, that's cool, but, this kind of stuff is mostly what you're going to get. So unless if you plan on using that as a white noise layer for something, which I do think that you can turn anything into anything. I've got lots of videos on that. That's a completely different topic though. But keeping that in mind, you're just going to get a bunch of trash. But every once in a while, you'll hear some things that are really cool and you can kind of add that as layers and stuff to your track. And if you already have a track and you start doing this, like a song or whatever, you're just going to be getting more material that's related to your original sources. And a lot of times that's how a lot of people fill out and have all those crazy sounds of like, whoa, how did you make that thing? It's like, no, I didn't sit down and spend, the meticulous time to do that. I was messing around and trying to just shove it through a bunch of things to see what comes out the other side. Don't say anything. But that's pretty much how a lot of sound design goes for us nerds these days. And for me personally, I tend to build the racks and stuff to help facilitate making these choices and stuff for you. So if any of this seemed interesting to you, I have a bunch of stuff on my website at alckemy.com where I build effect racks and something of the sort that usually kind of go in some kind of weird ecosystem or whatever. But the cool thing about Snap Heap and Multipass respectively is that you can use these racks as effects and put them on other individualized tracks. It doesn't just have to go within Faceplant. But I've got a bunch of these on sale. I've got some free stuff from the Gratis pack if you already have the stuff from Kilohertz. I'm not sure where it is, but yeah, it's in there somewhere. And there's a couple of racks that you can utilize in order to just break sounds to death. And the final thing that I'll say is that you don't only have to do this with Kilohertz stuff. I have racks built for Bitwig. I also have racks built for Ableton, or you can build your own if you're familiar with this kind of sound design. So thanks everybody. I kind of just wanted to do something different and kind of just not be so... This is an experimental video by all means. This isn't something that's supposed to be like, oh, you need to do this. It's more of just a, hey, this is where my head's been at and I've been having a lot of fun with it. And I hope that you can, get some enjoyment out of it as well. So please like the video, everybody. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you for the 26K and I'll see you all in the next one.